Good evening. This is Face the Nation. My name is Oliver Dixon, standing in this evening for Clement Manyatela. Coming up on the show this evening, well, it was first 700 million rand. That was the ticket we told the national dialogue would cost to take place, right? And that number was trimmed down to 450 million rand. Government contributing 60% and the other 40% coming from civil society and the private sector. But do the books balance, and is it in the right spirit? Anzio Jacobs, who's a member of the organizing committee of the first national convention taking place this week, will be talking to us on the show this evening. And the SACP rejects the ANC's ultimatum that members will have to choose either between the ANC or the SACP should the SACP go ahead and contest against the ANC in elections. Mbulelo Mandlana, who's the spokesperson of the SACP, joins us this evening. Gayton McKenzie, the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture and the leader of the Patriotic Alliance, is in hot water following tweets of his, old tweets that have resurfaced where he uses pejoratives like the K word. He is being called a racist and his head is being called for. Has he done anything wrong, and what punishment suits the crime in this instance, so to speak? Well, Ibrahim Fakir is going to be joining us for that this evening. But first, my comment. Tough questions about democracy. Are colored people black? Is it okay to use the K word, and what are the limitations to it? In a society with the social and political histories and complexities as ours, what is truthful and right is not always simple and linear. Our collective histories and complexities often demand from us to comb through controversial social and political moments with nuance in pursuit of the truth. It calls on us to appreciate that more than one truth can exist, where acceptable and unacceptable behaviors and expressions can coexist in a single moment, and that the infancy of our democracy will ever so often confront us with unresolved grey areas. This week, another such moment is upon us, sparked by Patriotic Alliance leader, Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Gayton McKenzie. Over the last few days, old tweets of Gayton McKenzie, such as the ones on your screen right now, had resurfaced on Twitter, where he, over the years, repeatedly used the K word. And ex-users and Twitter users have referred to McKenzie as racist for having used the K word, and he came out in defense saying he isn't and was not racist, and that he can't possibly be racist because he is black and presumably, therefore, allowed to use the word. He did, however, apologize for what he calls being insensitive, stupid, and hurtful. I'm curious which of his tweets he thinks were insensitive, stupid, and hurtful, especially given that he's quite routinely crass and crude. Political opponents across the political spectrum have called for McKenzie's head. The Democratic Alliance, Action SA, ATM, and even the EFF have called for him to be fired. Here is DA leader John Steenhuisen's take on it.
Let me just say, I don't think that that language has any place in South Africa. Just as singing Kill the Boer has no place in South Africa, I don't believe that those epithets or words belong in South Africa. I think that there's an extra duty of care on leaders in society to be careful about what they say and how they say it, and to ensure that we don't divide people and that we don't use these racial epithets. And I think that there needs to be consistency. We've had a number of instances in our party where individuals have said things that we felt were not correct, and we've taken action against them. They've been removed from public office, and we have dealt with them. And I think there needs to be consistency. It cannot be all right for one person to say something just because they have a certain skin color, but it's not right for another person to say something.
Well, one such member happens to be DA's Diane Kochler-Barner to use such epithets, and she's now back in Parliament in the DA benches. But I will submit this, that this is one of those moments that I described earlier, a moment ridden by unresolved complexity. A number of painful and complex questions lay at the center of this. Firstly, are colored people black? South Africans are divided on this question, including colored people. I myself am a colored South African. I have a view on this question that many other colored people don't necessarily agree with. Gayton McKenzie says he identifies as racially black and ethnically colored, a complexity South Africans have not yet completely grappled with. Not addressing this question is akin to ignoring the complexity that colored histories and identities are bound up in. There's been a general reluctance in dealing with the colored question, so to speak, in South Africa. And in instances where the question confronts us, there's been an insistence on dealing with it either exclusively as a question of biology, on the one hand, or either exclusively as a question of culture, on the other hand. Steve Biko's famous answer to this question is that identity is political, and that politically, colored people and black Africans are the same identity. Another complex question at the center of this is it ever acceptable to use the K word, not as a pejorative, but even in the context of making a political statement or using it as an adjective, regardless if you're black or not? Or is Gayton McKenzie being called racist because he's colored and therefore can't use the word? An unresolved question. Part of the complexity of the K word is that it remains radioactive in contemporary South Africa. Unlike in other societies where marginalized groups or previously marginalized groups have made concerted efforts to reclaim and reappropriate those slurs by incorporating it into everyday use, stripping it of its potency, such a shift has not happened in South Africa. For instance, the word queer was initially a derogatory and disparaging slur. Gay people reclaimed it, and the word today is a normal word, no longer derogatory. Or a more analogous example is the use of the N-word in the United States of America. Black Americans have reappropriated the words, and there is a clear distinction on who can and who can't use the word. So while in South Africa there's a very clear contextual line that white people can't use the word, there's existing jurisprudence and case law on this, we have not yet, as a society, found consensus on who can actually use the word, other than that as a political statement or used in academic terms. So the question of the day is this: does the K word have any place in South Africa at all, even if it's not used as a pejorative? You can send us a voice note right now on 078 459 1897. Remember to tell us your name and where you are sending the voice note from, and please keep it at 30 seconds, or send us an X on @FaceTheNationSABC. Well, it's going to be a heated one this evening, and of course we're going to be starting our conversation on the other side about the National Convention, the first National Convention. But first, let's take a break. And welcome back. South Africa will host its first national convention this week. This convention is meant to lay the groundwork for a larger national dialogue. On Friday last week, legacy foundations, including the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, indicated that they were withdrawing from the national convention. The convention will start on the 15th of this month, and of course it will be the first of a series of conventions. We now speak to Enzio Jacobs, who's a member of the National Convention Organizing Committee. And so I can't assume that it was easy to put this together. Logistical problems had been cited by the legacy organizations that withdraw from this, of course, least not of those being money. Have the logistical problems been overcome?
I think we can say emphatically to South Africans that they have. The venue is booked, the accommodation is booked, the travel is in the process of being finalized. And so we can say that the logistical nightmares and the challenges.
From where?
So we're calling on South Africans from across the country. We've got 200 organizations, 30 sectors that will be in attendance, and 1,000 people. And so there are people traveling from all corners in all 9 provinces.
And that travel bill, if I'm understanding it right, is being footed by the budget of the National Convention.
Yes, the travel bill in particular will be footed as part of the budget. However, there have been great in-kind contributions. UNISA is offering us the venue for free. The catering is for free. There are many of the printing materials, the marketing materials, etc., that are being contributed in kind and for free. And so we cannot be attentive to a budget that we don't have anything to do with. These are contributions that are being made by South Africans interested in this process.
Yeah, the budget is one thing. The legacy foundations had cited that government was seemingly hijacking the platform, so to speak, and not making sure that it remains citizen-led, whatever that meant. And of course, the conversation about citizen-led had found itself from the start amongst the organizations participating in this. Firstly, what do you understand, and describe to us what is meant by citizen-led? And secondly, is government trying to hijack the platform?
I don't believe that government's trying to hijack the platform. I think in real terms, we are calling on the state to act. And as head of state, the president does need to be part of a national dialogue. He's mandated as part of the national dialogue process in the constitution. So there's a constitutional objective in this process. But I think more than that, when we talk about ordinary South African citizens and citizens participating, how we get participation of citizens is first to call the sectors that we can identify across the country together and to say, How do we map this process? How do we begin those conversations? And that's really what the convention intends to do in its first iteration.
Should the organizing committee, or the preparatory task team rather, as well as the eminent persons groups, not have figured out the mechanics of the national dialogue, not just the first national convention, before a national convention took place?
Indeed, we should have, and we have. There's a roadmap to the national dialogue process. In its first iteration, it starts with the national convention, and that convention is meant to do sense checking. We're supposed to be understanding what it is that needs to be discussed and how to have those discussions. The roadmap then follows with a pilot process. The pilot process is meant to go into 15,000 dialogues tested across the country and across the wards to ensure that we know what ordinary South Africans in every corner of the country are saying. And then from that pilot process to do course correction. We want citizen-led initiatives, we want citizen-led engagement, and to do that process we will have to go through a pilot process of figuring out, is the methodology that has been put forward appropriate for the conversation we're having? Are those that we want?
That's exactly the point I'm making. What is the methodology that has been put forward?
So the methodology that has been put forward is to use a three-prong approach. The first one is a ward-level approach to ensure that every ward is covered and every citizen in those wards covered. The second one is a citizen-led approach. This means that while there is a toolkit and a recommended approach to the conversation, that ordinary citizens can choose the modality through which they want to have the conversation. And the third one is cross-sectoral and cross-cutting in thematics, so that we get as many of those conversations lifted, and where the thematics that have been put forward are not consolidating the totality of the conversations necessary, that we posit those contributions from ordinary citizens in.
Crystallize this for me. I'm from a small town in the West Rand, Randfontein. If I wanted to go to Randfontein and participate in my ward level or committee or regional level dialogue, who do I call? How do I know where it is? How has it been put together? And how do I ensure that it's not, again, waiting on government to put it together and then government dictating the agenda, the flow, and of course the dynamics?
Correct. So the way that it's been designed is that we will start with the 15,000 pilots, and those will be deployed via civil society largely. Those are entities that have put up their hands and said, look, as citizens, we want to lead this process. The dialogues will then be deployed in wards. Those ward locations will be announced to South Africans so that they can go to the dialogues themselves. But in the citizen-led process, what we're asking South Africans to do is sign up via an app that has both offline and online functionality to ensure that data is not a barrier. We'll be using community radio where people don't have smartphones to interface with the discussion, and we're then asking people to upload the data into that platform so that they can participate and be legible in their participation.
That sounds awfully complicated for a process that's meant to be a grand town hall.
Look, I mean, we've got 63 million South Africans. We're going to have to put some complexity into that process to ensure that everybody is heard and engaged in the process. We've got ambitious targets, and some of those targets are we want 60,000 citizen-led conversations to come about. The modalities of those conversations is because citizens can institute a conversation with as little as 20 people up to 1,000 people. And the modality through which they engage those conversations could be appropriate to the ways that they are engaging already. So if a church wanted to host a dialogue, they would be able to put up their hands and say, we're hosting a dialogue, we're going to call our community in, we're going to be discussing X. And it is their prerogative what it is that they're going to be discussing.
What if I go to a church that has a large tent somewhere in Randfontein and I'm like, I would like us to have a dialogue, and I raise my hand? Is the National Organizing Committee providing money and resources to me?
So the intention is that these are largely citizen-led and self-organized. There are modalities through which resources can be accessed, but that would be through signing up through this platform that is, again, online and offline in its functionality, and then to decide what resources need to be distributed where on the basis of having equality around the country in terms of reach. So if there are more dialogues, for example, taking place in Johannesburg, the prioritization might be the Northern Cape to get more dialogues going there so that there's equal representation of voice around the country. Those modalities will have to be discussed at the first convention. So the roadmap will be presented to the convention with all 31 sectors present, and the request is then for those sectors to be part of the interrogation of that process.
Yeah, let's go back to money. 700 million, that was the first figure we heard. The president said that's too much, go revise it. The deputy president chairing the interministerial committee had to go and relook at the figure. 450 million is the revised figure we now know of. 60% coming from the state, that's 270 million, if my math serves me right. And the rest of it will come from civil society and the private sector. Let's talk about it. Musa Mamane, the leader of Build One South Africa, but also importantly, the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee, had written to National Treasury asking where exactly the money is coming from. We know the president is putting some money into it, but so is NEDLAC. That's only for the first national convention. Where's the rest of the 270 odd million rand that government's spending? I want to cite a correct figure, so let me take a look at that number because I had written it down here somewhere earlier. I'm correct, 270 million rand from government. Where's that coming from?
So 270 million rand will have to come out of the fiscus, and indeed it will come out of DPME, which is responsible for planning and monitoring of the kind of development in South Africa. So the intention is to ask DPME to look at what their development objectives are, how it is that they can leverage on the existing plan within the DPME in order to support the dialogues. The DPME, as part of its processes, has to engage with the citizens. And so there are line items there that can be drawn from first and foremost. But again, we are calling on South Africans from all walks of life who want to participate in this dialogue to say, hey, we don't need to be waiting for government to front the bill for this. We can host. I mean, South Africans can host. Has
Minister Marupeni Ramakopa confirmed that they have the 700? I'm sorry, I'm pedantic about this, but it's important that people know this thing is actually going to happen and happen properly and viably. Has the Minister of Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation confirmed that they indeed have 270 million rand?
I don't think there's an outright confirmation, and I wouldn't presume to speak on behalf of the minister. There's indeed been a request. It's been led by the head of state, and there's a request to South Africans across the board to participate. That would include business. It would include civil society. It would include faith-based organizations, government, labor, and the like. That's why those sectors are being convened. So it would be presumptuous for us to say that all of this money is coming from the state. There is an intention for the state to play its role. Indeed, we've elected a government. We've tasked the government to deal with national issues, and so the government should use that mandate in order to support the National Dialogue Convention and the dialogue rollout thereafter.
Within a matter of days, the Solidarity Fund was able to put together billions during COVID, and there's an awful loud silence from the private sector about monetary contributions on their part. 180 million is expected to come from civil society and private sector. Presumably, the legacy foundations don't have that kind of money. Maybe this is part of the reason why they had raised the question of money. So have there been pledges and follow-throughs on the 180 million rand?
I mean, again, as I said at the top of the interview, UNISA has already pledged a venue for the first convention. They've considered or they've catered for us. They've ensured that the printing materials are there. We expect others to show up in the same way. But we are saying, I mean, I represent civil society in the formation. We are saying as ordinary civil society organizations that as we have come together between April and now, we've managed to organize ourselves with very few resources. We've used the modalities that we have traditionally used to engage civil society actors.
Okay, and other than UNISA's donation in kind, any pledges and follow-throughs that you know of? Because you're in the organizing committee, you should at least know of it. 180 million rand is not a little bit of money either. Has anyone come forward and say, hey, I've got 5 million rand, I've got 10 million rand, I'm willing to put it in?
I mean, I can't give you exact figures. I would be lying to you. But what I do know is that the process, at least for the first part of the convention, is covered in full.
Well, that's only this weekend, but there's a lot happening after this weekend.
Yes, and there's a budgetary commitment by the president. He said that he would support this process. And so we would have to find modalities to engage it. If that means that we have to rework the budget downward, as it's already been done, that will be what we have to do. As South Africans interested in a process that is going to change our landscape, we are also going to have to show up as ordinary citizens and say, we want this dialogue to go ahead, we'll find modalities to make it work.
Okay, so no real substantive commitments just yet. Okay, what does this weekend cost?
This weekend is sitting at the moment around 20 million. It's 1,000 people that are coming in from all 9 provinces. There's a road infrastructure, there's a flight infrastructure, and then there's the convening itself. So that's where that money is going to. It is largely being spent on transportation of the delegation.
And how much of that is coming from NEDLAC?
I don't know the figure off the top of my head from NEDLAC, but it is a substantive amount from NEDLAC.
Has the national dialogue and importantly the national conventions suffered a credibility knock when the legacy foundations pulled out? And you're from civil society, so you're ultimately from a similar walk of life, so to speak, as far as your contribution to this is concerned. Has it suffered a credibility knock?
I don't think it suffered a credibility knock. If you read the statement that's coming from the foundations, they say they will not be part of the organizing of the First National Convention. However, they also say that they will participate in the First National Convention. So while I understand that there are discomforts around the organizing, we have shown that in the last couple of days we've managed to successfully put together the logistics element of this event. And then we know that they will then come to the event and participate in it. So I think that it's a bit misleading in the public domain that the organizations are being punted as having pulled out. They've pulled out of the organizing of the process, not of the process itself.
Yeah, but that distinction is superfluous if we consider the fact of the reasons they cited about why they're withdrawing. And to say we don't think this is a citizen-led process, we don't think it's guided by the right principle, and on principle, we don't think we can, in good conscience, participate in this. That speaks to the credibility of the process, does it not?
My curiosity then becomes who constitutes a citizen and what is citizen-led? Are other civil society organizations not citizens? Are the ordinary South Africans that have stood up to hold that gap not citizens? And so when we are saying citizen-led, who constitutes a citizen? In the same way that anybody working from the foundation is working in the name of an ordinary citizen, we also need to recognize that they represent employees of their foundations and not everyday South Africans. Whereas in broader civil society, what we are seeing is ordinary South Africans that are putting up their hands and saying they need to participate.
Yeah. Well, importantly, just lastly, the timeline here matters. We only know about this weekend, really, and we hope that the modality will be worked out thereafter. But when is this supposed to culminate, really, in a momentum where we begin to see the 15,000 wards having 60,000 conversations?
So the National Convention will kick off. It is followed then by the pilot phase, which will happen between August and around November. In December, there will be a concerted effort then to train the trainers that will be, the facilitators that will be deployed to host the conversations. And then thereafter, the national rollout will begin. In that national rollout, the intention is to reach 60,000 South Africans in the dialogue process itself. We would like to then indirectly reach at least 10 million South Africans through the other platforms that we're using, which will include the app, they will include community radio, etc.
Yeah. Anzio, thank you so much for your time. And I know that you had to step out of a meeting to be a part of this conversation, but I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you.
Well, we've received some of your comments, voice notes and tweets coming in on our question of the day. And the question of the day this evening is there a place for the K word in contemporary South African politics, even if it's not used as a pejorative? Craig Gacheni says, good evening, Oliver. We are in 2025 and we've come a long way. And I thought such a word belonged in the past and was left there. There is no need to keep such words circulating in our communities because the connotations thereof aren't good. Let's take a look at the next tweet. Rabutata says the use of the K word is traumatizing, must be criminalized. It has no space in our country. We've got some of your voice notes coming through as well on our WhatsApp line. And of course, you can send us those WhatsApp voice notes. Do keep them coming in and do keep those tweets coming in. It is at Face the Nation SABC. We'd love to hear some of your thoughts there on X. And of course, your voice notes are coming through on our WhatsApp line. We're going to put that number across your screen once again. But let's have a listen at this WhatsApp voice note.
Greetings. We are living in exciting times indeed. Oliver, my brother, you are doing well. You are handling the show very well. Thank you so much. No, man, the K word doesn't have a place in South Africa. Not at all. That word just reminds us of the trauma we've been through in the apartheid regime. So let's do away with it. That's just my view. Sure.
I don't see a problem when a man who used to be called with that K word refer to that K word as was the way we were called. Irrespective of what statement he's making, he refer to people who used to call us that K word. I don't think him himself is a racist, because he just make example of what we used to be called before by so-called white people. We were called K word. So he's referring to that. I see no problem in that. That is my view. Thank you.
Well, I guess he used it as an adjective, not a pejorative in that instance. And I guess that is part of the gray area that we're facing in this conversation. Well, is the ANC and the SACP on the precipice of an ultimate divorce? The SACP rejects the ultimatum put on the table by the ANC, saying that members will have to choose. Either you are a member of the SACP or a member of the ANC. You'll no longer be able to use both memberships should the SACP choose to contest against the ANC in the local government elections and, of course, I assume the general elections. We speak to Mbulelo Mandlana, who's the spokesperson of the SACP on the other side of this. Don't go away. And welcome back to Face the Nation. The alliance between the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party is hanging in the balance. ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula says the SACP's decision to contest next year's local government election implies that their members will have to choose between the two parties. For its part, the SACP says the principle of dual membership in the alliance predates the electoral era of South African revolution. Joining us for more on this and to join us to unpack the SACP's position is the SACP spokesperson, Mbulelo Mandlana. Mbulelo, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. When the SACP, and maybe let's start by the rejection question. When the SACP says it rejects the ANC's ultimatum, what is the basis thereof, other than to say, well, we've always had dual membership? A fundamental thing has changed, and this is that the SACP now sees the ANCs as its political competition rather than its political collaborator.
That would be an incorrect way to look at it, Oliver. In the first instance, the reason why the Communist Party has not contested elections in the last 30 years is not because of some permanent conviction that the SACP is antithetical to elections. It is because there was a strategy that was relevant over the last 30 years, and that strategy was such that the Communist Party decided, particularly moving towards the 1994 transition, that part of our participation in the national political discourse and exercising the power of the alliance is that it shall be exercised by supporting the ANC, by backing the ANC on the basis of the common program by which we have existed. But you will know over time, a lot of political dynamics have evolved in South Africa and have now given rise to a circumstance that the Communist Party is required to reconsider its position.
Why?
And that reconsideration of its position has got to do with the SACP's own long-term program. So if that argument were to be accepted, it would be that the decision to determine our participation in the elections is dependent upon the ANC. That would be wrong.
But if you're contesting against the ANC in elections, as you are contesting against all other political parties that are on the ballot, ultimately the implication of that is vote for us. We think we've got a proposition for you as the country that will take the country forward, a proposition better than any of the other options on the ballot right now. By implication, it means that the SACP imagines itself to be a better option and alternative to the ANC. Ultimately hoping to unseat the ANC. Why then should someone in clean conscience be able to say, I'll be a member both of this party and that party, despite the fact that the one party says it's got a better proposition than the other?
The notion that we're in competition and therefore we are in a condition of mutual annihilation is a misconception. In any case, the Communist Party has always existed as an independent organization. The fact that it is an alliance is a function of its own independent decision. So if it makes a decision independently to go into the alliance, it can also make an independent decision about how to approach the questions of power while it is in the alliance, without affecting the validity of the very notion of the alliance. Another point, the Communist Party is not contesting against the ANC. It is contesting national elections, local government elections starting next year. The fact that the ANC is in the ballot too should never be interpreted as though the ANC is, as though the Communist Party is initiating this process in order to combat the African National Congress, its alliance partner. To think that would be to say the Communist Party should not consider, should be permanently excluded from elections. And that proposition is an incorrect proposition, because the Communist Party...
Well, that's not at all the proposition, right? The proposition is, if you contest and do so.
Sure.
Don't contest and then say, but we are still your partner and in alliance with you. That is at least the position the ANC is putting forward.
I'm not sure who is putting it like that, but let me tell you what is the alliance position and what is the Communist Party's position in the context of the alliance. The alliance is not built on the notion that the Communist Party has a permanent promise that it would never contest elections. That's the first point. The second point, whatever the Communist Party decides is independent organization and has a right to do that. Number three, the question of dual membership predates elections. So we can't have, for example, the Secretary-General of the ANC putting an ultimatum as if membership and leadership in government is only a function of ANC's work. Leadership in government in the past 30 years has been a combined effort of the alliance organizations when the times were brighter, and now that times are not that bright.
What has changed?
That fact continues to be true. This is what has changed. The South Africans have shown in the last election that they want us to rethink our strategy in terms of transformation of the country. They are rejecting the lack of growth in the economy. They are rejecting the crisis of corruption. They are rejecting state capture. They are rejecting all these weaknesses that are systematic in the way we have led South Africa.
Are they rejecting the ANC, or are they rejecting what you described as a collective effort? Are they rejecting the alliance?
Now, that would be for the South Africans to determine on the ballot. It is not up for me, particularly in this
But as a party,
instance.
surely you have a view.
Sure. We do have a view. Let me tell you what is the view of the Communist Party. The view of the Communist Party is that the Communist Party, if you trace the last 30 years, has stood opposed despite doing so inside the alliance. For example, on the liberal policies. Some of those liberal policies have led to the downsizing of the state, particularly SOEs, the selling off of some of them, particularly privatization. One of those issues in the privatization have led to a smaller participation of the state in the national economy. They have opposed the questions of gear and so on and so forth. That basket of contradictions has led politically to the summation of the contradictions that we are now looking at. And those have come to a head. And the Communist Party is saying,
but those contradictions
in the
aren't
context,
new, Mbalula.
and they are not new. But of course, they have been accelerating, they have reached a high point. And we are saying at this high point, there must be a tangent that progressives must look at as an option in order to resolve the crisis economically, politically that South Africa is looking at.
Is your maybe not your withdrawal from the alliance, because you don't claim to do so, but is your decision to contest the election that you stand a better chance advancing a political economy that doesn't downsize state-owned enterprises and strips it for parts, a political economy that isn't based on austerity measures, and a political economy that is, as you described, progressive? Is your contestation in the election that you're better able on your own to provide and deliver that to South Africans and no longer in partnership with the ANC?
The Communist Party, when it goes into parliament, it will have its own strategy about how it works around with the political parties inside. But of course, the primary consideration is that we'll work with the progressive bloc, and part of this, the progressive bloc, could be and would be the ANC. And we don't want right now, and it is important for me to make this point to you, Oliver, that to contaminate the discussion we're having now about planning for government we have not come into is unproductive for the Communist Party. Because the Communist Party is building its base right now in order to be ready for the elections. So if you want us to predict and preempt the technicalities of government operations when there is a reconfigured government after a certain election, you will have given us an unfair position. Because our position is that right now, the Communist Party has got three important decisions. We are going into elections, we are not leaving the alliance, and we are pursuing a particular policy that is different from the liberal policy that has now come to dominate the South African
Why then are you
discourse.
so desperate for your members to be able to hold a dual membership? Why not just say to the ANC, look, there are things you guys now stand for or have always stood for that we believe we can no longer go along with. We will contest an alternative proposal. That is to say, we're going to present to the electorate alternative proposal. And those who believe in us, vote for us. If you don't believe in us, don't vote for us. Why is it so important for you that Butimana Mela, Kwede Mantashe and members of the SACP who are in government at the moment, including Blade and Zamande, remain in government?
You know, a lot of commentators, and I'm sure you're making this point too, just like them, the members of the Communist Party who are in government are beyond just the cabinet members. The Communist Party is represented in very many parts of government overall, from different levels. In this way, to think about what we are supposed to have as interests of these individuals in isolation of the rest of the constituency of cadres of the Communist Party that are playing a role in government is to limit the Communist Party to the national chairperson and a couple of ministers. And as a Communist Party, we find that very problematic because it narrows the discussion. The discussion is not about the personal fate of the national chairperson. The discussion is not about the personal fate of the Minister of Higher Education and so on and so forth.
Perhaps it is reductionist, and you're right.
We would like to expand it then.
And if you expand it, the question remains, why then are you so desperate for members to be able to hold a dual membership?
To call it desperate is also offensive. Let me make another point. The Communist Party is a serious organization.
Certainly.
And we cannot allow ourselves to be portrayed as unserious and desperate and so on and so forth. I think that we've got to change that language. The last point, just to answer to your question, why are we intent on making sure that these comrades are not fired? If these comrades are fired, what statement does that make? It makes the point that the ANC has a right to punish and unpunish people in the government, especially the Secretary-General's positions. And we cannot allow that position. The Communist Party does not allow that position. The General Secretary in our anniversary rally yesterday is that those comrades who are in government as a consequence of the deployment in this particular government, even if it's a GNU government with which we have some discomfort, are a product of the South African electorate, and that mandate that they have is as valid as any other mandate. To treat them in that way as people who are dispensable on the basis of certain discomforts that are having certain people. So then to my earlier question, when someone goes and votes for the ANC like they did in 2024 May, that they vote for the ANC or that they vote for the alliance? Because then the inverse question holds, that do they reject the ANC or are they rejecting the alliance? I get you. When people were voting for the ANC, the alliance was behind the campaign. Now the citizenry, of course, was voting for the ANC because on the ballot was the ANC. But we also cannot act as though we are blind about the nature of the forces that come together to create that campaign, to create the legitimacy for the National Liberation Movement to be on the ballot. That legitimacy comes from the collective effort of the forces in alliance. And these forces are diverse in their political nature, they are diverse in their class nature, and they are diverse in terms of their perspectives. And therefore, whatever government comes out of that is a reflection of that combination. Therefore, to speak in this particular instance as though the Communist Party is an outsider in formulating strategically what we are living with is to undermine the value and the contribution of the Communist Party that is as long and as old as the alliance itself and even as the government itself.
In the last 2 minutes that we have left, I think it's important to explore this.
Sure.
Is there an opportunity for the SACP and the ANC to reconcile and find itself and its labor partners? The NUM told our reporter Samkele Maseko earlier on that if it comes down to it, they will throw their weight behind the ANC and not the SACP, right? And that just shows where other alliance partners and where the other formations of society believes their fate is best protected. Is there an opportunity for the ANC and the SACP to find itself? I know task teams have been set up to be able to find middle ground and mediate around this. How much of that is still left, or is the SACP adamant about contesting?
The Communist Party's decision is a Congress decision. So the leadership of the Communist Party is neither willing to change that decision because it would be refusing to follow the mandate of its members and to follow the instruction of the leaders that has been given by that Congress. So the question of changing this decision, in particular as we are moving to 2026, for the leadership of the Communist Party is not a matter that is on the table. And lastly, to change a strategy is not to reconcile. To reconcile is to mean that we're at war. As far as the Communist Party were concerned, we are not at war. It's the Communist Party that is taking a decision, and that decision is for the purposes of its constituency, for the purposes of the working class, and for purposes of the strategy that it
Mbalula is at war
describes.
by himself.
If the Secretary-General of the ANC or anybody in the leadership of the ANC perceives this dynamic to be an all-out war, they are making a mistake. And the Communist Party is not at war with anybody.
Yes or no, just the last one. The Metsimaholo outcome, was that proof of concept?
Metsimaholo was an important testing ground. Let's put it like that. It was an important testing ground. And what happens afterwards, of course, will benefit from the experiences of Metsimaholo.
Yeah. Mbulelo Mandlana, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for coming in. Really do appreciate it. And I guess all the best.
Thank you, Oliver.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break. On the other side of this, we speak to the question of the day. The controversy surrounding Gayton McKenzie and his use of the K-word. Ibrahim Fakir joins us. The question of the day is on your screen right now. We'd love to get some of your reactions, your tweets at Face the Nation SABC, or you can send us your voice notes on the number that had just been on your screen. We're going to take a short break. Don't go away. And welcome back. Sports, Arts and Culture Minister and leader of the Patriotic Alliance, Gayton McKenzie, has come under fire for his alleged racist remarks in old social media posts. The posts relate to apartheid-era slurs against black South Africans. McKenzie has now to answer to the South African Human Rights Commission for his tweets. The EFF has called for his immediate removal as minister, and the Action SA MP Alan Beasley says that McKenzie's comments do not represent what his office stands for, that of promoting unity and diversity. Ibrahim Fakir joins us now. Ibrahim, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. What does it mean to be racist in South Africa?
That's the million-dollar question. I think basically if you act against someone in a racist manner, which is you prejudice them in any fundamental way, that constitutes racism. If you limit their opportunity to exercise their rights on the basis of their identity, if you propose hate speech, if you demean them as an individual or as a group, you stand against their opportunities, that is an overt act of racism. Now, I know that in this emotive topic, people are going to think that, if I don't like Oliver for some reason because his skin is pink, that may be racist. It is prejudicial, it is bigotry, it is discriminatory, but it is not necessarily racist because, you could consider it racist, but it doesn't really materially impact your ability to exercise your rights or your access to opportunities and so on. So the reality is that we have to be very careful about what we mean when we talk about racism, particularly when we are in an emotive period like this. Now, we must also be clear that the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act actually lists issues around race as things which you can be held criminally liable for. And I think the thing that Gayton McKenzie has in his advantage, and this is not to excuse it by way of context, is that he didn't personalize this to an individual. So, it doesn't necessarily constitute hate speech. He doesn't say,
but surely you could be racist to a group of people at the same time. It doesn't have to be individualized or personalized in any way whatsoever for it to have the effect.
No, it doesn't. But in this particular case, in any of those tweets that he made, none of them are explicitly arguing for a particular form of action. It is merely saying something pejorative. But I could say something pejorative against you. I could say I don't like you because you wear terrible watches, with apologies to Kenny Kunene. But nevertheless, in that instance, you could try for crimen injuria, but not necessarily something which is criminalized in terms of that act. So they find subtle legal distinctions. But I mean, the broader social import here is that here is a person who is holding public office and is making demeaning remarks about someone.
Can I pause you there, because that's exactly the question we should be leaning towards. Was he using, and I mean, you've seen the tweets, right?
Yeah.
Is there a distinction between using the K word as an adjective versus using it as a pejorative slur for the purposes of demeaning? And if that distinction exists, which of those categorizations does Gayton McKenzie's tweets fall into?
Well, in this case, I think they would be both, because in some cases he is actually using it as a descriptor, as an adjective. He is describing, when he talks about applying the label to someone who's a beneficiary of BEE, for example, or affirmative action. That is descriptive, and it is generalizable to the group, right? So it is pejorative in the sense. So it is both descriptive and pejorative. And I think all of those tweets fall into either of those categories. They rely on stereotyping, they rely on kind of demeaning, they rely on casting aspersions and slurs, but they're not necessarily infringing on one or other person's rights or the ability to exercise those rights. And that's where the difficulties start creeping in legally. Socially, of course, we should all believe that this is unacceptable. Now, we haven't yet reached a stage in this society in which we start reappropriating words and giving them a positive spin, giving them a meaning, as they do in the US with the word in rap, in music videos, in colloquial discourse. There is a reappropriation of the word and giving it a positive meaning, giving it a positive spin. We haven't reached that stage, and we haven't had a discussion about that, but that's because the emotions are so raw, and because the way in which those words have been used have been so demeaning. We have instances in South African case law as recently as 2018, 2014 even, going back a little bit, in which the word is used in the 2014 case against an individual. In the 2018 case, where someone called Penny Sparrow made a generalized remark about this, and both of those were found to be completely unacceptable. The strange thing here, Oliver, is that, remember, these tweets are not recent, right? These tweets come from a long time ago, and they come off the back of a podcast in which podcast had made some demeaning remarks about another group, and kind of also generalized it. And therein lies the kind of problems we face as a society. We must accept to a certain extent that we all have inherent prejudices. There's things we don't like. In some senses, it's good that this has been ventilated. We know what we're dealing with. The question for me here is, this is someone who's holding public office and has been entrusted with public authority and public resources. And the question to ask now is that should such a person, entitled as they are to their kind of personal beliefs and so on, is that kind of person entitled, and should they be accepted in public office?
Ibrahim, should Cyril, and maybe let's crystallize it a little bit more pointedly, should Cyril Ramaphosa keep in his cabinet crass and crude people?
Look, in that case, you might exclude more than half the cabinet. So let's not use that as the criteria. But I think there's an alternative criteria which has nothing to do with what we're talking about now. And that is an argument for including parties in the executive which actually have a sizable and testable support base in society, which in this case is clearly evidently not the case. And this is not the only party, and this is not the only individual, Mr. McKenzie, being that person. I think he's got now the added disadvantage of having found out to hold a set of beliefs, irrespective of how he wishes to justify them, saying, I meant them in this way, I contextualize it in this way, I actually meant something else and I wasn't being pejorative. Irrespective of all that, we know that we have someone who's meant to serve a public interest, who has partiality to a certain identity, who not only shares that partiality but has disdain for others who don't share that identity. And so And so I think that kind of person should not be in cabinet. But I think there's a more fundamental reason why they shouldn't be in cabinet, and that is because they don't have massive support in society, number one, or even something exceeding 5% of support. But be all of that as it may, I mean, I think Mr. Gayton McKenzie's sort of defense would be that, look, I funded black people, I funded parties. For example, I think if you go back in history, you'll find that Mr. McKenzie, even funded places like Black First, Land First.
Yeah.
His deputy in the Patriotic Alliance happens to be an African person. So he's going to start trotting out all this kind of stuff. And I don't think you get anywhere really in society. I think let's have some objective benchmarks. And one of those objective benchmarks is that if someone holds these beliefs, firstly, I don't think they should be there.
Okay.
If we want to grant that, fine. Let's find alternative criteria. Let's test what level of support they enjoy in society. If they don't enjoy above a certain threshold of support, I don't think they should.
Well, that's more an argument for what the minimum threshold should be to enter a governing coalition. But we're going to have to leave it there. Ibrahim Fikile, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your insights. Really do appreciate it. And I just want to apologize to our viewers for Ibrahim Fikile's use of the N-word there. Presumably, he used it as a descriptor, not as a pejorative. But nonetheless, apologies for that. We did invite Minister Gayton McKenzie, and the invitation remains open. His party said to our producers that they're no longer speaking on the matter and they consider the case closed. Well, he still has to answer to the South African Human Rights Commission, which invariably will have to answer on this question. Let's have a listen at some of your WhatsApp voice notes responding to our question of the day. And our question of the day is, and of course it's on your screen right now, does the K word have any place in South Africa at all, even if it's not used as a pejorative? And this is what some of you had to say in your voice notes.
Sam Alokotrikopis Dumela. The use of K-word has no place in South Africa. However, the man who used it has publicly apologized. Besides, he used that word long ago. Why now? Why after having been appointed as a minister?
That word, the K word, deserves to be buried forever into the dustbin of history. I'm totally against it. Reminds me of the evils of apartheid, which was declared a crime against humanity by the United Nations. From Kabet Mukhadime. Thank you.
Well, Gayton McKenzie did not actually apologize for being racist or for his use of the word. He apologized for what he called to be insensitive or stupid, whatever that means. And of course, he wasn't specific about which parts of his tweets were insensitive and or stupid. Again, like I said, we invited him and the invitation remains open to Gayton McKenzie to discuss this with us. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your time here this evening. I really do appreciate it. It's been fantastic standing in for you here.